In 1971, the US dollar was dead. President Nixon had taken the stage, looked the American people in the eye, and severed its last vital link to gold. The anchor that had stabilized the world for 27 years was gone. By 1973, the American economy was on its knees. An OPEC oil embargo had shut off the nation's lifeblood. Gas lines wrapped around entire city blocks. The American empire, triumphant just 2 decades earlier, was finished. Then, a secret mission. Henry Kissinger, the grand chess master of American foreign policy, flew to Saudi Arabia. He wasn't there for a peace treaty. He was there to make a deal. A deal that would replace the gold America no longer had with the black gold the entire world needed. This is the story of the petrodollar. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is the documented public history of how America, in its absolute weakest moment, pulled off the greatest financial heist in history. They engineered a system that forced every nation on Earth to buy US dollars, whether they wanted to or not. A system that allowed America to fund its deficits, finance its military, and maintain 50 years of global dominance, all paid for by the rest of the world. I am going to show you how they built this system, why it worked so brilliantly, and why, after 50 years, that system is now collapsing. And what happens to us all when it's gone. To understand the deal, you have to understand the desperation that led to it. In 1944, as World War II was ending, the Allied powers met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. They had a problem. The world was in financial chaos. Their solution was a new system, the Bretton Woods system. And it was simple. Every other currency, the British pound, the French franc, the German mark, would be pegged to the US dollar. And the US dollar, in turn, would be pegged to gold at a fixed price of $35 an ounce. The dollar was, quite literally, as good as gold. The United States was able to make this promise because it held over 2/3 of the entire world's gold supply, safely locked away in vaults. This system worked. It created a golden age of stability and growth. The world trusted the dollar, so the world trusted America. But an empire has expenses. In the 1960s, America tried to do 2 things at once. It launched Lyndon Johnson's Great Society programs, a massive expansion of the welfare state at home, and it launched the Vietnam War, a massive, bleeding expense abroad. To pay for it all, America did what every empire does. It started printing money. It printed far, far more dollars than it actually had in gold to back them up. And the world, especially America's allies, began to notice. They were no longer holding dollars that were as good as gold. They were holding paper. The first to call the bluff was France. In 1965, President Charles de Gaulle, in a supreme act of political theater, announced he was sending a French warship, not a diplomatic pouch, a warship, to New York Harbor to redeem his nation's paper dollars for physical gold. And he was. The U.S. had no choice. Other countries followed. A run on the bank began at a national scale. America's gold reserves began to vanish. The bluff had been called. The system was breaking. By 1971, President Richard Nixon was trapped. He had a choice: either plunge America into a devastating depression to save the dollar, or save America by killing the dollar. He chose to kill the dollar. On August 15, 1971, Nixon went on television and announced he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. It was, of course, a lie. There was nothing temporary about it. The world's reaction was immediate: total panic. The dollar, with no gold backing, collapsed. Global currency markets, which had been stable for 27 years, were thrown into chaos. America's allies were furious. They felt betrayed. The world's trust in the United States was gone. The dollar was now an IOU nothing, a purely fiat currency, backed only by a government that was printing it into oblivion. America's financial dominance was dead. But the hits were just getting started. Just as the world was grappling with this new fiat dollar, a second, more physical crisis was brewing. October 6, 1973, the Jewish holy day of Yom Kippur. In a stunning surprise attack, Egypt and Syria invaded Israel, seeking to reclaim lands lost in the previous war. Israel was on the brink of collapse. The Nixon administration, despite being bogged down in the Watergate scandal, made a fateful choice. It would save Israel. Operation Nickel Grass was launched, a massive, overt military airlift. For 32 days, enormous C-5 Galaxy cargo planes, emblazoned with the American flag, flew directly to Israel, resupplying them with tanks, artillery, and ammunition. It was a bold, public statement of support. And the Arab world was enraged. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, the most powerful figure in the oil-producing world, had explicitly warned the U.S. not to resupply Israel. America had ignored him. So, on October 17, 1973, the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, retaliated. Led by Saudi Arabia, they unleashed the oil weapon. They announced a full embargo. All oil sales to the United States and other nations supporting Israel were halted. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The United States, which had built its entire suburban society on the promise of cheap, limitless gasoline, ground to a halt. This is the show, don't tell moment. Don't just say it was bad, show it. Show the hundreds of cars lined up in the freezing cold. Show the angry, frustrated faces of drivers. Show the fistfights breaking out at the pump. Show the "sorry, no gas" signs that became the symbol of a nation's humiliation. The economy, already reeling from the post-Nixon shock inflation, now slammed into a wall. It was the perfect storm. Inflation and stagnation. Stagflation. America was now facing a dual crisis. One, its money was worthless, backed by nothing. Two, its economy was dying, starved of the energy it needed to function. The empire was bleeding out. It was at this moment, its absolute weakest, that Henry Kissinger launched his counterattack. Henry Kissinger, Nixon's Secretary of State, was a student of power. He knew that military and political power were useless if your economy was dead. He, along with his new Treasury Secretary William Simon, devised a plan so audacious it would change the very rules of money. Throughout 1974, Kissinger and Simon engaged in a series of secret negotiations, flying to Jeddah Saudi Arabia. Their proposal to King Faisal was simple. It was a Godfather offer, a mafia deal. They offered the House of Saud a bargain. Part 1. The Offer. The United States would guarantee the eternal survival of the House of Saud. We will give you ironclad military protection. We will sell you our most advanced weapons, the planes, the tanks, the missiles. We will station our troops on your soil. We will protect you from your enemies abroad, the Soviet Union, a rising Iran, a radical Iraq. And we will protect you from your enemies at home, any internal rivals or factions that might seek to overthrow you. Your kingdom, your family, your power will be guaranteed by the full, unmatched might of the United States military. Part 2. The Price. In exchange for this protection, Saudi Arabia would do two things, two seemingly simple technical things. And here is the core of the heist. First, you will agree to sell every barrel of your oil only in US dollars. Not just to us, but to everyone. If Japan wants to buy your oil, they must pay in dollars. If Germany wants to buy your oil, they must pay in dollars. If France wants to buy your oil, they must pay in dollars. Do you see the genius of this? With that single move, Kissinger had repegged the US dollar. The dollar was no longer backed by gold. It was now backed by oil. The world didn't run on gold, but it did run on oil. Every industrial nation needed it to survive. And if you needed oil, you now needed US dollars. Kissinger and Nixon had instantly created a permanent, artificial global demand for their worthless fiat currency. They had turned their greatest weakness into their greatest weapon. But there was a second part to the deal, and this part was even more brilliant. Second, the Saudis and the rest of OPEC would now be flooded with billions of these US dollars, petrodollars. They couldn't possibly spend all of them. So the deal was, you will take those billions in excess profits and you will use them to buy our debt. You will recycle your petrodollars back to America by purchasing U.S. Treasury bonds. This was the masterstroke. This created a captive lender. America could now run whatever deficits it wanted to pay for its military, its government, its tax cuts, because it had a guaranteed foreign buyer for its IOUs. It was the most brilliant, lopsided, parasitic system ever devised, and it worked. The rest of OPEC quickly fell in line. By 1975, the petrodollar system was the law of the land. Here is how the racket functioned for 50 years. Step 1. Let's say Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia. Step 2. Japan cannot pay in yen. Saudi Arabia only accepts US dollars. Step 3. Japan must go to the open market and buy US dollars with its yen. This action, repeated by every country, artificially inflates the value of the dollar. Step 4. Japan pays the dollars to Saudi Arabia for the oil. Step 5. Saudi Arabia, now flush with billions of dollars, turns around and lends that money back to the U.S. government by buying Treasury bonds. Step 6. The U.S. Treasury gets the money and uses it to fund its military, which it then uses to protect Saudi Arabia. It is a perfect closed loop, a protection racket on a global scale. This gave America what was called the exorbitant privilege. It was the only country in the world that could buy real things, like cars from Japan, electronics from Korea, and resources from Brazil, with paper money it printed out of thin air. It could export its inflation, while every other country had to produce something of value to earn dollars. America just had to print them. This system defined the next 50 years. But this system also had a dark side. It was a golden cage, and the rule was simple. You are never allowed to leave. What happens when a country tries to break the system? Exhibit A, Saddam Hussein. In 2000, Iraq, a major oil producer, was under crippling U.S. sanctions. In an act of defiance, Saddam announced that Iraq would no longer accept dollars for its oil. It would sell its oil in euros. This was a direct attack on the petrodollar, a declaration of war against the system. In 2003, the U.S. invaded Iraq. And one of the very first things the U.S. Occupation Authority did, they switched Iraq's oil for food program back to U.S. dollars. Exhibit B, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. In 2009, Gaddafi didn't just want to switch currencies, he had a bigger idea. He began organizing a Pan-African Confederation, proposing a new, single African currency, the gold dinar, which would be used to buy and sell African oil and resources. This was a mortal threat to the petrodollar. In 2011, a NATO-led coalition, spearheaded by the U.S. and France, intervened in Libya. Gaddafi was overthrown and killed. His gold dinar was never mentioned again. Were these interventions about WMDs and human rights, or were they about enforcing the system? The message was clear. Challenge the dollar, and you will be destroyed. The petrodollar system wasn't just an economic agreement. It was an imperial decree, enforced by bullets. For 50 years, this system seemed unbreakable, until we broke it. The collapse of the petrodollar system didn't start in Riyadh or Beijing. It started in North Dakota. Reason 1. The shale revolution. Starting in the late 2000s, a new technology, hydraulic fracking, unlocked oceans of oil and gas trapped in U.S. shale rock. Suddenly, America didn't need Middle Eastern oil. By 2018, the United States of America became the #1 oil producer in the world. Think about the 1974 deal. It was protection for dollars. But if America no longer needs Saudi oil, the protection part of the deal starts to feel optional. And if you're Saudi Arabia, you start to see America not as a protector, but as your biggest business competitor. Reason 2. The geopolitical pivot. From the Saudi perspective, America had become an unreliable and erratic partner. The chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. The U.S. pivot to Asia, signaling an abandonment of the Middle East. The constant lecturing on human rights, even as the U.S. ignored its own part of the bargain. The trust was gone. The Saudis, led by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, realized they needed new friends. Reason 3. The new friends. And that is the final dagger. This is the show Donnell moment of the collapse. show the images of Chinese President Xi Jinping visiting Riyadh in 2022. He wasn't just given a meeting, he was given a royal welcome with jet flyovers and cannon salutes. Show the images of MBS and Vladimir Putin high-fiving at G20 summits. Show the logo for BRICS Plus as Saudi Arabia formally accepts an invitation to join the economic bloc founded by China and Russia. The House of Saud, America's protection client for 50 years, has officially pivoted. And in March 2023, the final taboo was broken. Saudi Arabia announced it was in active talks with Beijing to sell its oil to China in Chinese yuan. That is the sound of the 1974 deal being torn to shreds. The petrodollar system is over. The 50-year-old pact has expired. For half a century, the world didn't run on oil. It ran on dollars to buy oil. That era has just ended. The artificial global demand that kept the US dollar strong, the captive lender that financed America's military and its deficits, is gone. This brings us to the final terrifying question. We know what the exorbitant privilege was, but what does the exorbitant consequence look like? What happens when all those trillions of US dollars held in foreign reserves all over the world are no longer needed to buy oil? What happens when they aren't recycled back to us, but are instead dumped on the open market? They come home. All that inflation we exported for 50 years comes rushing back. The 1974 deal of Kissinger and Simon gave America 50 years of unparalleled funded dominance. The end of that deal will define the next 50 years. We are living through the quiet, tectonic, and terrifying unwinding of the entire global order. The rules of power are being rewritten right now. And this time, we may not be the ones holding the pen. If you want to understand the new system that is being built to replace the old one, subscribe, because in the coming decades, understanding this will be the new currency.